I am on sort of a quest to become a professional wrestling historian. I'm very much a moderate fan who is into some of the major North American products, who is now diving deeper into the world of pro wrestling. I've been getting into New Japan for the past year or two. I've been trying to get into Stardom this year, watching a lot of the smaller promotions to sort of get a better worldwide understanding of what professional wrestling is. And what I also want to do is get a little bit of a historical perspective on pro wrestling. Go back and not only learn a little bit about pro wrestling from older times, but also watch some of that wrestling to become familiar with how wrestling has stylistically evolved over time. And that is why I created this series. It's to go through and watch some of the greatest pro wrestling matches of all time. Another reason that I felt this was important is because there's so much great wrestling out there that when you want to go and watch something truly great, it's hard to filter out what you should watch. It's hard to understand whose voice you should trust in terms of what wrestling you should be putting your eyes on, and just finding the time to watch great wrestling. Because I'm not like some guy who does YouTube exclusively. I make videos in my spare time. I have a full-time job. I have a wife, and that's like having a second full-time job. Um, and I just don't really have a ton of time to watch wrestling, and it's especially hard when I'm trying to keep so up to date with modern wrestling that I don't have a lot of time to go back and watch some of the older stuff. So when I do have those opportunities, how do I decide what I am going to watch? And I turn to Cagematch. It's sort of my go-to wrestling site for keeping up with wrestling around the world to see what is popular and what's worth going and viewing. And there's definitely dynamics on Cagematch, people rating certain ways, and sort of these cliques that develop when they are rating matches. But I feel like it is probably the best source for sourcing great wrestling. Essentially, what you can do on Cagematch is if you go and you look up a card, a wrestling card, they have tons and tons of stuff. It is a catalog of the history of pro wrestling. You can look at what other users have rated matches. So if you go on to WWE's page, for example, and you want to see what people rated Evolution, there will be hundreds of people who have gone and not only left numerical reviews, but also left little write ups to explain why they gave the review that they do. So it's a very handy tool to use for people who want to find great pro wrestling. And like I said earlier, you're probably not getting a fully expanded view on pro wrestling. You are probably getting those people who are the more hardcore fans who skew more towards, the true graps wrestling versus the sports entertainment style of WWE. But I think it is probably the best way to find a variety of takes on pro wrestling. So what I did is I went in and I looked at every single match on Cagematch that A had at least 100 votes to its name, and B had a 9.0 rating or higher. Cagematch has a 0 to 10 rating scale, and getting a 9.0 or higher means it is a truly, truly great match because the majority of people watching it are rating it at either a 9 or a 10. So I feel like it gives you a good base for what you should be watching. So what I'm going to be doing in this series is watching matches from each year and then giving a short little summary of what I thought of the matches and how it sort of influenced my perspective on wrestling at the time. And I'm going to be rating each match on my typical 0 to 5 star scale. And I was sort of debating, should I rate these matches in a time capsule as sort of like this historical piece of entertainment, or should I rate them as I would if the match was happening now? And you'll see with the match that I picked today that I sort of lean more towards the historical time capsule perspective, but that won't necessarily be the case for everything. When we start in these early years, we just really get like 1 or 2 matches per year. But as we get into the later 80s and then into the 90s, we start to really, really get a lot of matches. So the first couple videos will be shorted. This video will probably be a little bit long because I'm giving this spiel and this introduction and this sort of ideology behind why I wanted to do this series. But there's not a whole lot of matches to talk about. But I'm going to do my best to sort of give some perspectives on why I feel these matches were historically important, why so many people online have rated these matches as being truly great, and then giving my perspective on them for whether I think they are truly great and how they sort of influence my understanding of pro wrestling. Very, very long intro before we actually get into this first match. The first match we're going to be talking about is from 1975. It is Antoni Inoki versus Billy Robinson from the NJPW Tokon series. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Actually, I know I'm not pronouncing that right for a fact. From 1975. I had heard about these guys prior to watching this match. Antoni Inoki is obviously the founder of New Japan Pro Wrestling back in the 70s, and he's this historically significant figure in wrestling for that reason. And he's sort of like the top guy in New Japan in those early years, the one who was really pulling fans in. And it's weird to say that he is the president and the top star because you could paint a little bit of nepotism on him, but it really seems like he was the draw, similarly to how Hogan was a draw in the 80s, or how Austin was a draw in the late 90s, where he was legitimately bringing in business. So his place at the top was completely validated. People really wanted to see him. He was the megastar in Japanese wrestling. And back in the 70s, and I can't say this with certainty, this is just me going off of this match and a couple of their videos that I watched explaining what wrestling was at the time, but wrestling in Japan in the 70s, and historically through Japan throughout the decades, I think, veered more towards a traditional pro wrestling style where they were looking at um, grappling and catch as catch can wrestling versus sort of the bombast that North American wrestling is known for, both in the States with stuff like WWE, as well as lucha libre styles down in Mexico. Japanese style wrestling seems more to really focus on a traditional sense of pro wrestling. And Antonio Inoki was a famous figure in that field. I feel like his matches and generally his career isn't as rewatchable as some other Japanese wrestlers who would come around a little bit later. I'm thinking of, AJPW wrestlers like Misawa, Kobashi, Taue, or even sort of New Japan wrestlers in the junior heavyweight scene that would come later, like El Samurai and Jushin Thunder Liger. He's not, from a modern sense, as rewatchable as that, but he is considered a great wrestler of his time and sort of the megastar in Japan. And he's going up against Billy Robinson. The only Billy Robinson isn't super famous. He didn't have a lot of high profile matches, and unlike Inoki, he wasn't really considered a superstar in any regards. He is a British wrestler who was a huge inspiration for Zack Sabre Jr., my personal favorite wrestler on the planet right now. That's how I initially became aware of him. Is Zack adopted something called the Billy Robinson style, where every 6 seconds you switch into a new hold, which I thought going into this match was very interesting because when I think of pro wrestling from the 70s and 80s, I think of a lot of rest holds. I think of a lot of downtime where not a lot of action is happening, and you hear about these matches that were really long, hour-long matches where just not a lot was going on. So hearing that this guy was really keeping things consistently flowing and changing over the course of a match really intrigued me. So I was actually really excited to watch this match. It was the first time I had seen either of these guys wrestle, and it was slower than I thought it was going to be. It was sort of an in between of what I thought, where it wasn't like the very, very slow paced perception that I had of pro wrestling in the 1970s, where it was primarily rest holds, but it also wasn't consistently evolving grappling. There was some extended periods of rest holds. This match went 60 minutes, I believe, or close to it. I believe, let me just double check because I don't want to sound like a complete idiot. Um, Sorry, this is like a dead stop to the video. But it went 60 minutes, and within that 60 minutes, there were some pretty extended periods of rest holds. You know, these sort of minute long headlocks and chin locks and stuff like that. It was 60 minutes. But that wasn't the entirety of the match. It was a 2 out of 3 falls match, so it did have some innate drama into it. The first fall was Billy Robinson on Antoni Inoki at about 43 minutes. I'm reading this off of Cagematch right now. And the second fall was Inoki on Robinson at 59 minutes and 12 seconds, and they drawed 1-1. So it was more dynamic than my perception of pro wrestling at the time gave it credit for. Some grappling exchanges throughout the match that did bring this dynamic energy to it, and that really sort of spiced things up. And I can see why this match is so beloved and why this would be considered an unbelievably great match at the time, because the length of it and the stipulation really give it this added sense of ceremony. And it was great technical wrestling. I want to put finger quotes around great because it's that style of great that you more appreciate than really love. You know, like watching a match on AEW Collision where you sit back and you go, that was a very good match. Didn't really make me feel anything. I'm not particularly inspired by the characters of the program, but I have to say it was a good match because technically it was a very good match. That's sort of what I feel about this match for a different reason. The Collision ones is more just because it's a style that's overdone and I'm sort of bored by it at this point. This one, Antonio Inoki versus Billy Robinson, was more just not a style that I'm a really big fan of. I hate rest holds in wrestling. I think they're so unnecessary. There's no place for them. Just give me consistently great action. But I can see why they were present in this match. And one thing I liked about the match is it was really, really ugly, but in a good way, in sort of that way that I associate Japanese pro wrestling and strong style with, where it felt like a real struggle and it felt like these guys were constantly trying to gain the upper hand against each other over the course of the match rather than this cooperative effort where you can really see the strings of it. I really felt like they did a good job about encapsulating the audience within the action of the match, which is where stuff like this thrives. You know, when I think of popular wrestlers from the late 70s, early 80s from North America, I think Hogan, I think Andre, I think Ultimate Warrior. Three people who very much did not have wrestling styles, at least while they were wrestling for the WWF and WCW, that didn't look real. It was cartoonish. It was over the top. Even wrestlers who I really, really love, like Roddy Piper and Randy Savage and Mr. Perfect, it didn't really seem real. And Antonio Inoki versus Billy Robinson seemed real. It did a fantastic job about really allowing you to suspend your disbelief, knowing, at least in the modern day, that you are watching a worked wrestling match, but sort of being able to push that to one side because they do such an effective job at making it seem like a real struggle. The striking was very convincing and the selling was as well. They really made it look painful. The submission moves were maneuvered into in a way that was very impressive, but not like Zack Sabre Jr. or Bryan Danielson, two of my favorite wrestlers of all time, where it's really fluid and it looks almost like an action movie the way they get into it. This match, when they go into an armbar or they go into a headlock, it looks really ugly. And it's to the match's credit because it really makes it seem like a real fight. Um, and I really liked the match. There were some points in the beginning when I was sort of tuning out or looking away, and that's because it was 60 minutes and I knew it was going to be an hour long match going into it. So when they put those rest holds on, I was sort of like, oh god, whatever. But there was always points where they were able to draw me back into the match, especially in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I feel like they do a really good job about sort of crescendoing the action and really pulling the crowd into it. The crowd was so hot for this match, mainly because Antonio Inoki was in it. And rather than a match you would sit down and say, I love this match, it's more an interesting piece of history that you can go back and appreciate. Sort of like watching a silent movie from, like, the 20s, 30s, 40s. Watching that and going, I can appreciate the craft of it, even if it's not the style of movie that really gets me going, really intrigues me, and the thing that I want to watch. So I gave it 4 stars. I thought that it was it was interesting to watch rather than being necessarily enjoyable. And I think that if most modern pro wrestling fans were to go back and watch this, they probably wouldn't like it because it's really long and really slow and really builds to a crescendo at the end. But those fans who are interested in the history of pro wrestling and do like more of a grappling style, I feel like would really like that. And I feel like that's reflected in the cage match rating. With 107 votes, it's got a 9.24 rating. That's really good. 9.24 is an incredible rating. And I feel like some of that comes from people like me who are going back and watching this with a historical lens rather than grading it and rating it like it was a modern match. And if you're going to watch this, which, yes, I do recommend you do, if you are like me and want to get a better understanding of historical styles of pro wrestling, then you should do it with that lens. You shouldn't get expected to be blown away like you would be watching, a Ring of Honor match from 2005 or a New Japan match from 2017 or anything like that. But you can go back and you can really enjoy it. And I guess my conclusion on this is it's hard to sort of get a feel for pro wrestling from just one match, but I don't I feel like this was the best example of wrestling from the time period to go back and watch, because it sort of takes the cliches that I normally associate with pro wrestling at the time, the over the top cartoonishness, the sort of slower pace to it all, the more favor of the big hulking giants rather than the true athletes, and throws those all out the window to create a very interesting back and forth conflict. And it's not necessarily a product of the time either, because I've seen matches like this, like CM Punk versus Chris Hero, in IWA Mid South and wherever they had their series of matches that I just hated. Like that was in 2002, 2003. I thought those matches were so unimaginably boring, and this match is a lot better than those ones. I feel like it's not entirely that I'm looking at it through a historical lens. There are things they do in the match that are genuinely great and stand the test of time. I feel like sort of just saying this match was great for being in the 1970s diminishes how good it actually was and how hard these two worked to produce a great match. So there is this sort of intrinsic nostalgia that I'm watching it with, viewing it in a time capsule, but also it is just great in its own regards. So that's why I landed on the 4 rating. I feel like if it was considered a great match in the 70s, but it was so unimaginably boring today, I wouldn't give it that rating. But I was impressed and intrigued by a lot of things they did in this match, and I really liked it. I feel like as a way to start this journey into learning more about pro wrestling history and to sort of watch some of the greatest pro wrestling matches of all time, starting in 1975 with Antonio Inoki versus Billy Robinson, is a very good way to start this journey. I want to know what you guys think, though. If you go out and watch this match, what do you think? Do you agree with my ideas that it's good for the time, but it's also good today? Watching it in a time capsule is definitely the way you have to do it, but doing that, you can very much get some real enjoyment out of it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know what matches you are excited to talk about on this channel, stuff you know is going to come down in the future once I get into the later years of pro wrestling. And let me know if there's anything I missed, any pieces of historical context that would have maybe altered the way I view this match, if you know them. And while you're down in the comments, please consider leaving a like, leaving a subscribe, as it really does help a new channel like mine to grow. But with all of that being said, I'm very, very, very excited for this new series. I feel like it's sort of a unique idea that's going to be a lot of fun to watch and also a lot of fun to talk about. And I hope you join me on the journey as we go through it. Once I get into some of the later years, like especially in the 2000s and the 2010s, it's going to take a lot longer to go through that catalog of matches. So the videos are going to be more sparsed out. But I hope you stick with me on the journey. God, I fucked it right at the end on the outro. I fucked the last word. I was literally about to say thank you for watching, and I just screwed up the last word. So sorry you're dealing with an amateur like me, but thank you for putting up with me. I have been Isaiah from Hot Tag Wrestling. I want to thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.